Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our preview for the People's Open, the WM Phoenix Open, one of the best events of the year to watch as a spectator, and frankly, looking forward to what is a decent field out there, some DFS and some prop action, some outrights out there on the field. They can hopefully make it a pretty good sweat as well. So first off, welcome in here to our live stream. I can see we've got already a bunch of comments down there in chat. We've got Jason, Barry down there, David, and Why I Win. First off, welcome on in. And second off, let's go out there and have ourselves a weekend. Got a little bit of a water in hand, had a coffee about an hour ago, so we're all good to go on our caffeine. And I've got a bunch of lineups to make. So we're doing a 150 max this week. I've got 10 single entries locked in, loaded. And, we're going a little bit heavier on the exposure just because it's such a big week. So looking forward to it. And I'm definitely going to need my water because it'll be a long night of making some lineups. But we'll go ahead and hop right on in. I'm just actually going to keep the cap off of this. Hopefully don't spill any. Actually, you know what? We're going to put the cap on. We'll be prudent about that. But yeah, let's hop right on into this, right? No further ado, no delay at all. Throw your questions down in chat when we get over to the DFS side, as when we'll stop and go over some of those questions. But we'll go through DFS. We're first off going to look through the weather side of things. Then we'll hop into the DFS and questions. And then towards the end of the live stream, we're both going to look at props and underdog and prize picks for the PGA side, but also for LIV. So we'll talk some outrights. I'll give you guys my LIV card as well, because that starts tomorrow in terms of the LIV Golf Las Vegas event. They don't want to compete with the Super Bowl in the same city. So obviously, I'm trying to get that done a little bit early this week, but we'll touch on all of that, right? Weather, DFS, props, LIV Golf, all of that here in about an hour live stream. So expect that. That's the schedule of events. So in terms of the golf course, we're not going to spend that much time here just because we kind of know what to expect from the WM Phoenix Open. We're getting a little bit of a curveball with the weather, which I think presents a little bit of an edge, both from the weather perspective, trying to target one wave over the other versus over the first 2 days, but also from a skill set perspective. In the past, this normally plays firm and fast. They had a little range report today with ESPN Plus. They streamed it on that network, also over there on YouTube. So a lot of you out there probably saw that. And one thing that I really honed in on was what Tom Kim said about conditions, that he's played here twice before. Not a huge track record for Tom Kim, but that it always played firm and fast. He said even when he didn't play it in tournament play, it was some of the hardest turf that he's played on. And that leads to further drives normally, and also makes it a little bit harder to hit the greens. So this time around, they're not only going to get some rain tonight, they're not only going to get some rain tomorrow afternoon, which you see in the forecast over here, but today they got about a half an inch of rain. The day before that, about another half of an inch of rain. So it's about an inch of rain over the last 48 hours. And on top of Thursday, you've got a little bit in the forecast overnight between Friday and Saturday, and potentially a little bit of a storm there on Saturday night too. So there's definitely going to be a lot of moisture out there in TPC Scottsdale. And I think it's going to play maybe a little bit harder in round one than what you see for the rest of the golf tournament. But these guys are going to get after it, right? When there's no wind out there, when it's not going to be raining, you're going to see -2, maybe even -2.5 scoring averages. So just taking a look at Friday, the weather looks perfect out there for the second round of action. That's going to be that type of round, right? Where you see just some odd, ungodly scoring with a little bit of rain in the forecast with slightly higher winds expected out there for Thursday. You're going to see scores a little bit more moderate. I think maybe a little bit better than what you had with a firm and fast version of this event last year, but not quite, right? Like a 2 under par scoring average, like you might see out there for Friday. So Friday, I think, is going to be a gold mine for DFS, particularly if the prop apps aren't adjusting for the change in wind. They'll probably do a little bit of adjusting, right? They'll look at the round one averages and make, adjustments off of those as well. But I think that the gap between Thursday and Friday in terms of scoring conditions is probably going to be larger than what they're accounting for. So we're probably looking a little bit too far ahead from that angle right now. But in terms of DFS, I do see an angle that we can take. So we're going to be favoring bombers this week. That's going to be my mindset with the added wet conditions. And I'm also looking even more at approach play. The one de-emphasized stat would probably be around the green. So going into this week, right, talked about it on the course breakdown, even with some of my outright selections, that around the green play was going to be really important. And while it'll still have a hand in this golf tournament, it won't be nearly as important if it's going to be unbelievably receptive, right? Because these guys just aren't going to miss many greens when they're 7,000 square foot. Also when they're going to be dartboards out there. It might even have ball in hand for the first few days. It would not surprise me if, because of the rainstorms in the forecast, that they do ball in hand for the first round. There were puddles out there. If you guys didn't see some of the reports from the golf course, which has me thinking that around the green, probably a little bit less important, right? Everyone's kind of getting up and down when you have ball in hand. And on top of that, I think it's going to play a lot longer. I think you're going to see this golf course that's not extremely long, right? It's not like we're talking about a 7,700-yard golf course. I just think it's going to play longer than most years, rather than seeing a few guys that are shorter pop at this event. Last year, right, no one was really that short off the tee. But if you go back, right, the last 4 or 5 years, you have some guys that are, some of the shorter players on tour that have succeeded here. Even Stricker, right, who's won this event in the past. I do not think you're going to see that this time, right? With those wet conditions, I think it's going to be a lot of those bombers that, typically play pretty well here to begin with, but even more so with the wet conditions. And again, the approach side of things, which I'm also boosting up a little bit, I think that your guys that are elite level wedge players, even just elite level at irons in general, like a Tom Hoagie, for example, are also at a huge advantage, right? They're going to be able to take aim at pins, being extremely aggressive. If they have ball in hand and they have those dartboards, which I think kind of changes the equation, right? It's normally firm and fast. It's normally, kind of has a different identity to it, which I think needs to be in, at least in the back of your mind when you're going out there and building lineups. In terms of the weather edge I was mentioning, I think that the weather on Thursday afternoon is something to monitor here. So I've got the HRRR model up here. And what you'll notice is that the last tee times over there in local time is going to be right around 2 p.m. local. I believe it's 1:50 p.m. is when you have the last tee time going off. And that's when the rain ends in the afternoon, right? So from about, let's say, 12:30 to 2 o'clock, right, there's probably a storm that's going to be in there around that vicinity, which means for the first, let's say, hour and a half of tee times out there with the PM wave, maybe the last hour and a half of some of the later tee times, right, of the guys going out there early, are going to be playing in a little bit of a mist. Now, today they had a little bit of thunder come through. They had some hail coming down, which ended up being a suspension of play. If that happens, the PM wave is golden, right? If there's any sort of delay, go out there and absolutely book it. They're going to have by far the better conditions compared to the guys in the AM wave. But even without that, right, I'm not counting on that, right? For this slight PM wave advantage that I think I see here, it's more so the wind conditions, right? So even if they kind of have to weather the storm, literally, right, for the first maybe hour and a half of play, that's 4 holes, right? They're probably going to play a little bit slower because they're playing in that downpour. I think that you might have to have preferred lies because you saw so much puddles out there, even from just like a little bit of rain out there today, which means, if they can just go out there, weather the storm, right, take their time, right, while it's a little bit stormy. Look at this weather. The wind completely drops off. You got it going down to 3 miles an hour of sustained wind. And let's say they end up delaying play, right? And they have to go over here to Friday. Friday looks absolutely immaculate. So I like looking at NAM for 2 days out. A lot of the weather people have said that that's a little bit more accurate 2 days out. From what I've heard on Twitter, people just getting back to me with feedback. Also from other streamers like DGen has said he's heard a similar thing. So I think it's far from a trend at this point. But if you look at NAM for 2 days out, right, you'll see here not a ton of sustained winds in the morning, right? Temperatures look a little bit lower, at least early on, but looks immaculate to play out there. So rather than having to play through, and let's go back to HRRR for less than 24 hours out, you'll see that the morning wave has to play with like 13 mile an hour winds for the last maybe 2.5 hours of play. In the wind gust, right, they're not that much lower there in the afternoon, but for a solid, let's say 2-3 hours of play, they're playing in like half the wind of the guys in the morning. So let's say on day one, it ends up being an even spread, right? That would be a huge win for the PM wave, right? Because over here on Friday, where conditions look pretty much perfect, right? Going back over here to the NAM model, I mean, it's hard not to want to play that PM AM stack. So that's the way that I would be leaning in a lot of my GPP lineups, right? Is trying to take some of the guys that are going off a little bit later tomorrow. And I would say the best players to take would be the later tee times. So like your 150 tee times would be like the absolute nuts, the guys that would get the biggest edge because they might not have to play in much of the rain, right? It looks like it's coming down between 2 p.m., right? Maybe tapering off around 3 p.m., which means at most they'd be playing like 3 holes in those rainy conditions. And after that, right, the wind is at least supposed to die off, right? Per these projections here, in a golf course that is wet, has no wind out there, I mean, you could see some just ultra low scoring. So I like that advantage. I think if you have to make a decision, right, trying to choose between 2 players, that's probably the best way to go about it. So if you're on my Patreon, right, you can see my player pool on there. I have a lot more PM guys on my player pool than AM guys, but it's not like I'm only taking the PM wave. It's worth noting that I think your player pool should probably shade that direction. I think something like a 60-40 split or even a 65-35 split between the PM AM wave and then the AM PM wave sounds like a pretty reasonable ratio, right? So the 65%, of course, being the guys in that PM AM wave. But another thing to consider is that on top of just shading your player pool that direction, you might want to correlate some lineups, right? So whether you're 150 maxing, whether you're just entering a few single entries, 20 maxing, no matter what format you're playing, you're at least this week, the way that I see this playing out is that we have the potential, right, for like a stroke and a half advantage, right? If everything were to play in our way, let's say we even get a delay, right, to start that PM wave, you can have like a stroke and a half advantage between the 2 waves. If that were to happen, right, you want some exposure that's going to have at least 5 players from that PM AM stack, maybe even all 6 players, right, with guys from that PM AM stack. So let's say you're playing a 20 max, maybe you throw 4 or 5 lineups in, right, that only play guys from the PM wave, right, or at least are 5 ones of guys in that PM AM versus AM PM. I would say a single entry, right? Maybe you throw in one lineup that's a pure 6-0. If you're 150 maxing like myself, along with some of the single entries, maybe you take 20-25% of your lineups and stack them in that kind of direction. So I think it's an interesting slate. I'm going to wake up before play tomorrow, double check the weather, kind of to see what it looks like before I go out there and let my lineups lock. Because if we end up getting a change in the weather, right, maybe it flips to the other side. Maybe I take some of those correlated lineups and turn them into stacks in the other direction, right? I just want to be flexible with it. These forecasts are a little bit variable. They've changed quite a bit over the last day or so. So you want to at least be flexible if you're planning on using the weather to your advantage. But as of the data that we have at this second, right, which is all we can work off at this stage, right? We can't assume that this is going to change in one direction or the other. It looks like if you're going to play an advantage, you maybe stack that PM AM wave. That's all I've got in terms of the weather edge. Let's hop over to the DFS side now. We'll go over any questions that people have and then talk some DFS strategy. Then afterwards, some props, both for PGA and for LIV. And we'll talk some outrights too. So let me get some water. Let's say hi down in chat and see what we're doing. What's going on, Jason? It says, dude, I'm stuck between Ann and Minwoo. Who am I feeling? So if I had to choose between those two, it would be Minwoo, pretty much regardless of the contest. But in large field GPPs, it's not entirely close. Somebody like Benny Ann, I think, is in incredible form, but is unfortunately extremely chalky. So in larger GPPs, I don't think it's close because you go at the lower owned Minwoo. But even from just like a vacuum standpoint, right? Evaluating the 2 plays, I think they have a similar skill set, both extremely long off the tee, really good around the green players. I just think that Minwoo is a better putter. So long term, I think he's going to have more wins. I would side with him in a vacuum, let alone when he's at lower ownership. So I would go that way. What's going on, Barry? Scotty for the 3-peat. I could see it. I'm scared of him this week. We'll talk about Scotty. He'll be a talking point for sure. You can see that ownership number there. Of course, guys, this week, the ownership tab is going to be free as it has been for the last few months. A good talking point for these live streams. You can see, yeah, Scotty, 36.1%. a talking point we'll get to. What's going on, David? You're getting killed in your one and done, and you need to get away from the chalk. Well, we'll give you a few options for it, right? Scotty, not the differentiation you're looking for, but we'll talk about a few. You got Ricky, Thigala, or Ann in your one and done. So if you're looking to get different, Ricky's the answer, David. But I'll give you a few more options as we go through the player poll. What is going on? Why I win? It does look saturated, huh? Real wet out there. What's going on, Brant? Austin, David down there as well. The other David, David Krieger. What's going on, man? Giving you Fowler vibes. Please slap you. I think I'm drinking the Kool-Aid too, man. We'll talk about it. Good course history. It's tough to pass up sometimes, huh? Do I think that there's an AM PM advantage? No, I think it's the other way around. You're not playing him, just saying. I'm playing him. I'm going with it. What's going on, Curtis? What do I think the winning score will be? I think I said minus 16 on my live stream. Now that we're here on Wednesday, I would say minus 18, minus 19. I think that the guys are going to get after it. You don't have nearly as strong a field as maybe we've had the last 2 years. But yeah, I think minus 18. Yeah, a lot of Ricky fans down there in chat. You got to love him, right? The guy's great. What's going on, Stenio? We got Anthony who says Adam Scott or Adam Hadwin. So it's Adam Hadwin for me. And a lot of it's ownership based. Adam Scott getting a lot more steam than I was expecting, right? Monday, I did not think he'd be popular. And I've got him at, let's look, 16% ownership. I think as of the last look, yeah, 16.4%. So just in terms of the ownership battle, it's Adam Hadwin for me. The course history are excellent for both, right? A lot of top end finishes for Scott. Adam Hadwin has been Mr. Consistency. So I would go with Hadwin, but those are two chalky plays, and I get it, right? Course history has been pretty decent. Let's go in Samuel. PM AM wave is for the main slate or round one. It would be for the main slate. Yeah. So if you're talking round one, I think it'll be a little bit of a toss up. I think it'll be pretty even for the first day. But I think in round two is where you'll see the AM advantage pick up a lot of their strokes. If there's a delay in play and the guys in the PM wave end up playing in no wind and no precipitation, right? It's going to be super soft after a rainstorm, then mega advantage, right? But don't expect that, right? You build those correlated lineups in case you get that, crazy outcome, right? In case you get an outcome where one wave is so much more important than the other that you have to have them for GPPs. That's not something that's going to happen all that often, right? But when it does happen, you want to account for it. And just based on the forecast I'm looking at, that's the only advantage I could see, right? So if you're going to play a weather edge, it's that. How do I feel about Wyndham Clark over Cameron Young? So is that for props or are you just talking for DFS? I like Wyndham Clark this week. I like him coming off a win. He's one of the few players that I don't think is going to step off the gas that much. You kind of saw that right after he won the Wells Fargo. Still, I think the week after was maybe a little bit disappointing, but quickly got back on the horse to contending after that win. I think that he's a decent play here. Cam Young, I think with the softer golf course is more intriguing too. So I like both of them, but yeah, I probably would go with Wyndham Clark. Any thoughts on Ann or the Postman? I think that they're some of the more popular plays on the slate. You'll see here that I've got JT Poston at 18.4%. I've got Benny Ann at 16.5% ownership there. They're popular because of their recent form, right? Number 8 there with JT Poston. That is excellent form. And then Benny Ann, I know it's not as impressive from the shots gained perspective, but he's been making just so many cuts. And he had the near win, obviously, at the Sony, has had a few other top finishes here in 2024. I get it. I'm just a little worried about the ownership, if that gives you an idea of what I'm potentially doing with both. We got what's going on. Welcome to the chat. What's going on, TH? Thoughts on Johnny Vegas? Sneaky play that I like. I think that you're looking at the right type of players if you're considering a Johnny Vegas. And I'll be on him this week. It's mostly the off the tee play. Track record is decent around here and hasn't played often, right? He was coming off a lengthy injury, right? He hadn't played for, I think it was 6 months or something crazy like that. So he's going to be playing into form, right? He's going to get better as time goes on. Maybe this is his get right spot. Why not both, Jason? Yeah, exactly, right? You could play both of them. Who was that in regards to? I'm not sure. But yeah, if you're choosing between two players, you can always take both, right? Just play more lineups. Tanner says, thoughts on Ann versus Poston for a one and done if you're behind, but you have JT available. I think saving a mega stud this week makes sense. And JT, based on how he's playing, is a mega stud. but he might just win this golf tournament. But if you had to pick one for one and done, ownership, in my opinion, is not as important in one and done. Right, like an 15% owned to play is a lot, but I think guys like Poston might be like 7% owned, right, out there in a one and done format. It's not horrible chalk. So I would probably go Postman. He's got good course history here too, and the elite level course history and the form most importantly. Thoughts on Chesson Hadley? Decent putter, good long iron player. That's spot on. Right, I was going to say has his buckets that he kind of pops in terms of the approach play. You could convince me to play him in a lineup or two. Now, I don't have exposure myself, right? But like, if I had more exposure to work with, which I haven't set my lineups yet, I guess I could be convinced to play Chesson. If you had a good argument for me, I could play him. I guess I could see the thought process is what I'm trying to say. Florida Vibes, hole-in-one, -120 on Hard Rock Bet. Interesting, right? There's a bunch of hole-in-ones here. I think it's been like 4 of the last 5 years, or it's at least 3 of the last 5 years that we've had a hole-in-one. And it's not just 16 that you see hole-in-ones on. I believe it's like 11 or 12 that we've seen hole-in-ones on before. I might have to look into that. Is it still -120? We'll look at the Hard Rock Bet later on. We might have to think about that one because I'm rooting for one too. It'd be nice to root for that. Jack says, you think Eric Cole could do well? Seems to be an all types of course type of player. I agree with that and has gone under the radar. I'm not sure if it's under the radar. I haven't heard him talked up. So from that perspective, I agree. But 11.8% ownership is pretty average. He's definitely gone up in price. So I think that's why he's maybe not getting the same type of attention. Right? Eric Cole was coming in the 7K range, right? For a lot of events. And this type of field, right, was like $7,600. And a lot of the events in the fall swing, even here in 2024, right, has still been in the 7K range, which was inexplicable, right? He was just a much better talent than that. I just think that at this point, he's now adequately priced. So you don't get the kind of steam behind him, but just world-class player, right? I don't think we've changed our opinion on him at all. I just think that a lot of people out there probably don't talk about it because of that. With the conditions, can you really even avoid chalk this week? I think you can, absolutely, right? So can you really avoid it? I think it changes the golf course, right? And a lot of times chalk is tied to the types of players that have good course history. So Scotty Scheffler is the perfect example, right? It's 36.1% owned, back-to-back champion. Justin Thomas is your second highest owned player. Why? Because his track record's immaculate, right? Now, I'm playing him because, in comparison to Scotty Scheffler, right? He's not nearly as chalky as what you have with Scotty up there. But you can say that about a lot of the chalk, right? If you go down to the 7K range especially, now some of it has to do with recent form, right? So like a Mark Hubbard I've got coming in pretty chalky, but some of the guys down here are only like 7-8% owned because of their track records at TPC Scottsdale. This type of event where it's going to maybe even be like ball in hand doesn't happen very often. I'll say 2019, this event was kind of wet, right? So I think a lot of people looking at that recent form or course history don't know that about the 2019 Waste Management, is that it played exactly like what we had this week. And one thing I'll say to people that liked Ricky out there, he nearly won that golf tournament that year. He put it into the drink on 17 to not win that golf tournament. So if you're going to look at any course history, right, I think it should be the 2019 event, where you're not seeing a lot of steam, right? Not a lot of people are looking at 2019 to get their course history for this week. A lot of them are looking at the last few years, and they're all going to play Scotty, right, if they see that. So, yeah, I think there is an argument to be made there. I'm playing some of the chalk. I'm fading some of the chalk, of course. It's trying to find the right pieces. So maybe looking more into the form instead of the, course history. You'll play both in DFS, was more for one and done purposes. Okay, cool. Let's see. Due to the morning wave being colder than usual, will the course play harder? Last year, they were all wearing long sleeve shirts. It was relatively cold 2023. 2022 was a little bit warmer. So I'm not sure I'd say playing way harder, but maybe marginally, right? The ball's not going to travel as far. It's wet, right? You're not going to get any kind of rollout out there in the fairways. But it's going to be a lot easier when you look at it from the green regulation perspective, right? You're going to be able to hit a lot of greens. You're going to be able to go out there and throw darts, take on pretty much any pin location. So I wouldn't say it's going to play harder, right? Because the firm and fast nature of this golf tournament is why it's so tricky, right? You have a lot of greens where you have to land it short to get it close to a front pin location. Now you're going to be able to spin back wedges, right? Rather than having to hit real creative shots. Around the green, for example, right? You're going to have ball in hand potentially. If we see that tomorrow, right? This golf course, which is normally extremely difficult around the green, or at least some years can be real difficult around the green, it's going to play real easy around the green, right? So I don't know about that. We'll see. We'll have to see. It might play a little bit harder. We'll be doing props later on, man. Nick says, thoughts on Fitzy this week? If you're buying that it's going to be a little bit, sloppy out there, a little bit colder this year, which it looks like for at least the first 2 days, as a narrative that you can play into. Well, Matty Fitzpatrick fits that. Unfortunately, the weekend looks like it's not going to be as rainy. Looks like it might dry out a little bit. Might even get a little bit sunny right there on Saturday and Sunday. So, the first 2 days, right, it might be perfect weather for him. Weekend might just be neutral. So all things said, I think that he's a decent pivot at that kind of ownership. So yeah, I let me double check. I'm 99% sure that I'm not getting exposure myself, but I want to circle back on that. He's not my favorite play. Let's put it that way. If he's in my player pool, it's hardly. No, not playing him this week, but he's not the worst play. How do we feel about EVR? There's some steam coming on. Because he's had a few decent events, right? People are kind of catching on to EVR being a decent play. I think he's still the kind of player that I thought he was the last 3-4 weeks when I've been playing him. Right? And, being able to get decent results out of him the last month or so. I just think that now that he's 7.5% owned, that he loses a lot of the utility, right? In the past, he was like 2-3% owned, even cheaper on a lot of these 2024 slates. It just went out there and it paid us off. And now people are looking at the form. They see him at number 22, right, in recent form ranking, despite being like number 50 in pricing. And they go, oh, I got to, buy the EVR train, where, reality is you should have bought him when he was like 2-3% owned. So I don't think he's a horrible play by any means. I'm a big buyer on him long term. I think that 2024 is going to be a really good year for him, but I think that the ownership is maybe a little bit high there. Don't love it. Cool. It's good to know. We'll circle back on that, Tanner. Remind me. How hard do I think the course will play tomorrow? Under par. So I don't know if hard's the right word for it. This is, if you look at the sportsbook odds, they have guys projected at like 68.5 strokes. They have Scotty at 67.5 strokes, which is 3.5 under par, right? So I don't think it's going to play super difficult. I wouldn't use that word. Ricky won it in 2019. Don't believe so. I believe that was the year that Hideki won. Let's check. We can bring it up right here. Ricky won 2019. Was it 2020 then? It's the year that he finished third that it was super rainy. What the fuck? They said 29. I was watching the broadcast today. So the reason I knew that, right, is I was watching the broadcast today. It was the year when there was a playoff with Hideki Matsuyama. So it was 2017. Was that whole? Wait, no, because it was that year. So it was 2017 when it was super rainy. So sorry. Wrong year that I was quoting before, but this is the golf tournament we were talking about here. Ended up hitting it on 17, screwing himself there in the last round. He had made a charge up the leaderboard to tie Matsuyama and Simpson there. Ended up putting it on the drink on 17, screwing himself. So if we look at this leaderboard, it's actually, I don't have the tab up here. Let me bring it up because I think it's rather interesting. We're going to go back to DFS here in a second, guys. But Hideki wins, right? Webb's not all that long, finishes in second. Louis not all that long, finishes in third. JJ Spawn, right? We wouldn't call a bomber. A lot of the guys towards the top aren't your bomber type of players. Now, if we go through this entire field, it was a weaker field that year. I mean, sure, you have Brooks Koepka here, Cam Smith before he was even, remotely the golfer that he is today. And then just not a very strong field. So I don't know if it's comparable to look at this leaderboard just because of how weak it was back there in 2017. But I mean, the top of the leaderboard, right, is far from bombers. In fact, Martin Laird hits it a pretty good way. I mean, Ricky's, hits it a long way. Same thing with Hideki. You see the same thing about Daniel Berger, right? He can catch a golf ball, send it, out there. But there's enough shorter hitters on here that maybe it's not as much of a bomber week as, it could be. I still think you're going to see a bomber emphasis, right? Especially because we have the colder conditions. It wasn't nearly as dreary that year in 2017. I thought it was 2019, but yeah, it must be 2017 when they had those conditions. But this time around, when it's cold and it's wet, I think you're going to see that kind of advantage. Didn't really happen there in 2017, though. That's interesting. Let's see. You think Ryan Fox could be the live outsider at 150 to 1? I'm not sure he's going to win this event, Jack, but I really like him for fantasy. I like him from just like a popping perspective, low owned player, but I'm not sure he's going to win this golf tournament. Playing any Svensson or Eckroat? Svensson, yes. Eckroat, no. Any Harmon love? Yes. Decent course history, has made some cuts. Have to say, he's not really a flashy player, right? Like, I don't feel like he's going to win this golf tournament. But as an 8K player, he's the kind of guy you just need him to go out there, finish top 20, preferably top 10, and he could do that. Matt Kuchar, decent course history, likes a desert golf course. I just don't think it's the best week with the weather, right? Might play a little bit longer. Do I ever bet first round leaders? Nah, just a little bit risk for the Thursdays. I do it every once in a while, like every blue moon. Yeah, I'll bet some first round leaders. You can convince me to look at them, though. I'll look at them when we go to Hard Rock Bet because they are fun, aren't they? And it's the kind of week where I'd be totally with that because it's a bigger event, right? Majors or when I do like first round leaders. Favorite plays in the lower 7K. Yeah, we'll get to that here in a minute, but there's a few we'll go through. Am I playing any Svensson or Eckroat? Yeah, so yeah, I'm playing Svensson. If you ask a question, by the way, I'll go through all of them. No need to repeat. We'll be good. All right, let's hop into this. So in terms of our strategy for this week, we've already mentioned that I think that the PM AM wave might be worth exploring for some correlation. But in terms of our plays, it's the type of week up top where you have an unavoidable chalk. You have guys like Scotty Scheffler who are going to be like 30, maybe even 40% owned, depending on the contest that you're in. A lot because of just the guys that withdrew, right? You had Xander Schauffele, who was another 10K player, who we now don't have in the mix up there. You've got Scotty Scheffler, who's a whole $1,600 more expensive than Justin Thomas, but is just going to be astronomically owned. I mean, you're talking about back-to-back champion, right? 7th place before that. The course history just doesn't get better than what Scotty Scheffler has over the last 3 years. So I understand the chalk, and it's kind of unavoidable, right? So like, I know somebody asked the question before about like chalk being avoidable or not being avoidable this week. Up top, it is unavoidable chalk, right? Like you're going to have to play some guys that are going to have some ownership. Now, you could fade Scotty Scheffler and Justin Thomas, but even down here in the 9Ks, right, where you're going to have to play guys, right, if you're fading that 10K range, there's still chalk here. I mean, 18% owned, Max Homa, right? 15% Burns, nearly 16% there with the Jordan Spieth. It's not like you're getting huge ownership discounts, right? I mean, compared to 36% on a Scotty Scheffler for sure. It's the kind of slate where you have to make your pivots down here in the 8K range. And then more importantly, and really importantly, it's vital this week, is the 7K range. The 7K range is where you're going to win or lose a GPP this week. So from the overall strategy perspective, if you're going to take chalk, do it up top this week. That is something that I normally preach here on the channel, but especially because of the withdrawals and the condensed ownership that we have up here, you're going to have to do that even more so this week, right? Like if you're trying to pivot up here, right, you're taking a Fitz or maybe a Cam Young at relatively low ownership. But I mean, you're not starting a lineup with Fitz and Cam. I mean, you can, right? I mean, that would be a hell of a contrarian way to start your lineup, but that would also be overdoing it, right? Like, I mean, there's getting leverage and then there's overdoing it out there, just making pivots for the sake of making pivots. Smart GPP lineups, what you're going to see a lot of the top level GPP players, a lot of your 150 maxers do, is start with maybe a chalky piece like a Scotty, who I'm playing this week. I'm matching the field on. That's going to be my take. It's the complete bitch out move on it, but it's what I'm doing this week. It's what I think is the best idea for my portfolio, right? The way that I play, the types of leverage that I'm getting up top. My best strategy this week is going to be to just like take 40%, punt Scotty Scheffler, and move on elsewhere. But if you're going to take one of these pieces of chalk up here, you don't have to feel guilty about it, right? When you're building your lineups, right? It's unavoidable. You're kind of going to have to take somebody up here that's going to have some ownership, and that's okay, right? Whether it's starting with a Scotty or a JT, or whether it's going down here and taking, a 16, a 15% owned player here in the 9K range, you're totally fine, right? And honestly, these 9K players that are like 15, 16% owned, I wouldn't even call them chalk, right? They're just normal ownership for their range. So still love JT. He's in the PM wave, which I think is a little added bonus. Still like Sahith, still playing him, even though he's in the AM wave. And like I said, guys, I still have like 40% of my player pool that's in the AM wave, right? So if I'm talking about there being an advantage for the PM wave, I think if anything, it's going to be a slight advantage, but still one that you might want to explore for that correlation, right? Maybe it ends up being a larger advantage than what we end up expecting. And that's when you want to have that, small subset of lineups to account for that kind of news. So still like Sahith Theegala. In terms of ownership, it's worth noting that Max Homa actually has the highest ownership of anyone in the 9K range, and he's only there at 17.6%, and your lowest is only 9.2%, right, with the Cameron Young. So there's not a massive spread in ownership in the 9K range, which just further adds to the idea of just playing your guys, right? There's not a lot of leverage to be had up here. Whereas in the 8K range, there's a ton of leverage that you can make. And in the 7K range, there's unlimited leverage to be had. So speaking of the 8K range, this is starting to get to the point of your player pool where I think you're going to win and lose the GPPs. I think a viable strategy on a week like this would be if you're playing 150 lineups, that is, okay? And I'm not doing this week. I'm not giving you my strategy for this week, but I could understand someone doing this, playing all of these guys from Sahith up to Scotty Scheffler, literally playing all the guys from 9K plus, and then using the rest of your portfolio to differentiate. If you did that from 9K plus, you could get 20% of all of these players. You could fit that into your exposure. I can promise you, because I've done it before on a slate like this, just punting the entire top end of the board. And then, like I said, the 8-7K range is where you get all the leverage, right? It's where you make a lot of pivots, where you force in guys that are uncomfortable to play in hopes of getting that differentiation to the field. So I'm not doing that, but because of, I think, the lack of top end talent here, right? And part of it's because of the withdrawal. Part of it's because of just how steep the talent gap difference is between, like, I mean, it's not a horrible talent gap drop, but like these guys down to, like, I'd say even like Sungjae Im, like you go even higher, right? From like $9,300 and above down to the next tier with like Cam Young, Sahith Theegala. It's a rather large drop, right? And I think the name that really makes it stick out is like JT Post and Benny Yan, right? Like they're at $8,800, $8,900. You spend up an extra $500, $600, you're an elite tier player, right? You go down here, you're guys that are 7K range, right? In big field events. And they're up here in the nearly 9K range, right? Out here for the WM Phoenix Open. And in the case of these two, that's the thing that I think makes them the most egregious chalk is they're like 18, 17% owned, right? Between the two players. They're like 35% combined ownership between a JT Poston and a Benny Yan, which I just frankly don't understand. So if you're going to make your pivots, I think where the best range to do it is down here in the 8K range. And it's not just there, right? Like Adam Scott, like his form has not been good, right? And we're going to play a chalky Adam Scott. Like I know he's number 7 in recent form ranking, but like the finishes aren't as impressive as you'd hope, right? It's like, we're looking at event history. Look at this, right? Event history, 38th, right? And his only start the last 5 years. Let's bring up his recent form now. Let's see, T20, and he hasn't done fuck all other than that, right? Hasn't been doing jack shit. He's been playing on the European tour, if anything. And the reason why people are thinking that he's been playing amazingly, like especially of late, is they look at their recent form ranking over here, right? Which stats, don't get me wrong, guys. I'm a huge stat guy, right? We talk about them all the time here. Use them for a majority of my analysis. They can mislead you though, right? If you don't know where the sample size is coming from. And with Adam Scott, the shots gained metrics that are making this up are from, last season in a lot of cases, right? Fall swing for a lot of the events here with Adam Scott, where he played well, but now he's been 3-4 months removed from that type of play. So there's a lot of chalky pieces in this range, right? These two, you can tell I'm not playing them this week. Adam Scott, I think, is a guy that you could probably put on that list as well. The only thing kind of saving in Adam Scott, I would say, is the fact that he's in the PM wave. Same thing with a Poston and Benny Yan, but they're also going to be higher owned, right? Because of that wave edge. If people start catching on to the fact that you might have that advantage, we'll have to see what, other people are going to do with their exposure. If they end up also going that direction, Poston and might be like 20% owned, right? You might get 18, 19%, right? Out there on an Adam Scott. That worries me for their ownership prospects. Down here in the 7K range, a few chalky players to worry about. Siwoo Kim's like 10%, Akshay's 10% owned. Dietrich at 7.5%. It's not great, but it's not horrible ownership. Hubbard 8.9, Kitayama 10.5, Kevin Yu 8.8%, and then Sam Ryder, the only real piece of chalk that we have down here in the 6K range. He's 8.7% owned. All of those players would be ones to kind of like give them a little side eye right before playing. I mean, even like a EVR, right? You got to make sure you really like them before you go out there and play them. And heck, even a Luke List, Nick Taylor, right? If you're going to play Nick Taylor this week, you must really like that course history, right? Which I think maybe not the move this week with the softer conditions. If you're going to play Luke List like I am, right? I'm not going to jump off Luke List just because he's 6.5% owned. But if I'm going to play him, right, it has to be because he was one of the first names I wanted to get to. So that's the way I handle that type of player. And with a lot of the guys that are getting that steam down here, I'm just not going to be a buyer at that ownership level. I think that you can make an argument for Mark Hubbard because of how well he's been playing. The shots gained metrics, he's number 28 in recent form ranking, but he's had a bunch of events of gaining like 4 or 5 strokes on approach. He's had 3 events over the last 15 starts where he's gained over 4 strokes with the putter. He just has a really good skill set for popping, both for DFS and for outright. So I kind of understand the chalk there, but you can't be playing all of it, right? If your player pool here in the 7K range is all of those chalky names that I just mentioned, which are a lot of the ones that you'll hear on podcasts this week. I mean, right, like Keith Mitchell, right, too. You probably heard his name a few times on the podcast this week. It's because they're the guys that are the, just, no-brainer type of plays, right? The guys that check every box. And they're 7K players for a reason. They could always go sideways, right? We know that. And if they're going to be 4 or 5 times higher owned than some of the other guys around them, then there's a real good argument to be made to just avoid a lot of the chalk in this range. So that's what I'm taking, with the exception of a few players. Thomas Dietrich, right, another guy that I was on super early in the week. So just because he's 7.5% owned doesn't mean I'm going to jump off, right? He was one of my first leans, one of the guys that I really wanted to get to early in the week. But if there's somebody I'm, debating adding, let's say, Mark Hubbard, right? I wasn't huge on to begin the week, right? Now that he's 9% owned, I'm not playing him, right? Like it's like these type of players where it's like, it'd be nice to have him right in my player pool, but he's 8.9% projected owned. I'm just going to avoid that. And in higher dollar contests, also in single entry contests, I think you're going to see him at 10% plus ownership. So that's something to note with these 10K players, is a lot of times in the higher stake stuff, you'll get Kitayama even higher ownership than what you're going to see here in your large field GPPs, which makes them even less attractive, right? Out there for any sorts of leverage or from the game theory angle. In terms of the lower end of the 7K range, I know we had a question about plays here. So if you guys have any other ranges you want me to cover, let me know down in chat. But I know we had, and let me make sure it was the bottom end of the 7s. I know it was some part of the 7s we wanted covered. Let me double check though. Get some water while we're doing that. Hey, this Fave plays in the lower 7K. Let's get that done for you. Ugh. I got to stop trying to speak and I have water in my mouth, right? That'd be good. So in terms of the lower end of the 7K range, the guys to avoid, right, are the chalky guys we just mentioned. And guys I think you might want to consider as, game theory pivots. Adam Shake intrigues me. Unfortunately, an AM wave golfer, but that doesn't mean that you can't play a guy this week, right? Just because they're in the slightly, quote unquote, worst wave, which could completely go the other way, right? I wouldn't discount that, by the way, the fact that the other wave could be easier. But Adam Shank, longer player off the tee. I like his length, I like the fact that, he's going to be able to take advantage of the soft conditions. He's aggressive. He takes aim at pins. And more importantly, he has the length to not get bitched around by the longer golf course, essentially, right? He hits the ball like 330 through the air. The guy is an absolute tank. Doesn't look like it, very unassuming, nerdy, kind of guy. And I mean that as affectionately as possible, right? I'm a nerdy guy myself. I understand the struggle, but does not look like he's going to hit the ball 330 yards. Let's just say it that much. Does. So maybe Adam Shank is worth a few looks. Kevin Yu. Now, if you're going to play somebody that's a little bit chalky, it's got to be somebody you really like, right? Well, Kevin Yu, I'll just give you guys the behind the paywall kind of look. It's a guy I really like, a guy I would consider playing. at a little bit of ownership. The reason why is the form does not nearly reflect how he's been playing. Right? It's got him here at number 104. If you look at the finishes, right, the kind of times he's been in contention over the last month, like, something special is coming for Kevin Yu. And the one thing he does well is he hits the ball a country mile off the tee, and he is real streaky with the irons. He has rounds where he'll pop for like 3-4 shots gained with the irons, and then kind of like what you had with Mark Hubbard, right, who will gain a bunch with the irons and with the putter. Every once in a while, you get a little spike round with him for the flat stick. So they're kind of like Kevin Yu this week. In terms of pivots, right, it's trying to keep the ownership lower. Aaron Rai, I always think is a little bit underrated. And this week isn't that chalky. Sometimes he gets some ownership, not so much this time around. Adam Svensson, I've only got it 5.4%. I hope that ends up being his actual ownership number, because if so, that is well too low. And I guess Jake Knapp, right? I know he's in a 6K range, right? He's $6,900, but I really like Jake Knapp this week. A lot of people are going to play Sam Ryder, right? He's a little bit chalky there, but I like Knapp a whole lot, and I really like Gsluke this week. Gsluke finished in second tier a few years ago. Just really plays well at these type of tracks, right? TPC courses, as we call him, TPC Lee, of course. And then Davis Thompson, too. Davis Thompson, long off the tee, right? So we're looking for that bomber narrative, right? He would check that if you're somebody like me that's doing that. And then on top of that is an electric iron player. Has played well in the desert climate before, out there with his Amex, right? Runner-up finish to John Rahm. So these type of players are the guys I like, right? Like, so we talked about one that was kind of chalky, right? Out there with Kevin Yu, but a lot of those guys were like 2% owned, right? Guys that aren't getting that much attention, or even like a Svensson. I know he's 5.4% owned, but that ain't bad for Svenny, right? 5% of Aaron Rai, like that's not terrible for Aaron Rai, or all the kind of guys that I'm taking. Let's see. Let's get to the questions and then talk props. We're taking too long. My bad. I'm yapping too much here. My bad. It'll be interesting to watch a bit of LIV Golf. Yeah, I'll be doing the same. Tree line desert course. Yeah, there's no real sand out there. So the whole property is all grass and trees, at least from what I could tell in the overhead views. So it's obviously at elevation. It's going to be in that thin air in the desert. So it's going to have some of that to it. But they're growing out the rough. I heard they have the rough at like 4 inches. We'll have to see if that's true tomorrow. And I've also heard that it's a little bit firmer and faster than they'd like, or at least was last week. They got some rain over the last few days, which will probably soften that up, unfortunately. But I think it'll be a fun watch. Thoughts on Kitayama? He's chalky. I was going to say, and I get it, but I honestly don't get it. I haven't watched a lot of the pods, I guess, that touted him this week. I do know that he's getting a lot of attention on Twitter. A whole lot of people have told me that he's, just on their betting card, right? That's where a lot of the steam's coming from, at least that I've seen. But I've heard a lot of people say too that he's like unavoidable chalk. And let's look at the event history, right? It's got to be event history. That's normally the reason that somebody in the 7K range becomes chalky. T23 last year, that's not it, right? The form's okay. Is he doing something I just don't understand? T39, T24, T29. I'm not a big fan. I understand the play. He's playing good golf, but to be 10% owned, like why? Is he playing that well? I just don't get it. So single entries, cash, I'm totally fine with it. I think he's a solid play, right? Making cuts, shots gained metrics. Let's look at the shots gained too, right? Just for shits and gigs. Let's look at the last 36 measured rounds. So let's give him a good sample size to work with. What was his price, right? $7,200. Let's find him here. So gaining on approach, losing off the tee, losing with the putter. It's just Kurt Kitayama. I don't quite understand all the steam. I'm maybe not nearly as high on him as some other people would be. Let's see. Shuffler, JT, Homa, Burns, all at the top of the leaderboard Sunday afternoon. That would be a hell of a golf tournament. I'd love it. Let's see. You're loving Griot, $7,600. Not sure who you're talking about. So let me know who you're talking about. Let you know my thoughts. But you're saying Griot, $7,600. I like him with the soft conditions. I'm with you on that. Justin Suh, $6,600 as a flyer. Poor form, but good finish at Sawgrass and the PM Wave. PM Wave helps for sure. Good finish at Sawgrass. I think that's a decent comp. So I like what you're thinking there. And the price tag is good. The only issue I would have, right, is that the ball striking form is probably not as good as we'd like. In terms of the last 36 rounds, just to show everyone here, right? Like he's losing in every category but the flat stick, but he pops like once a month, right? Actually, I'd say probably once every 2 months, right? You'll get a pop performance from Justin Suh. And when he gains from tee to green, I mean, the putter is always going to be a huge plus. That is by far his strong suit. He goes out there and he contends in golf tournaments. So I prefer him in weaker fields. I'm probably going to wait until like the Honda Classic, and then I'll play a whole lot of Justin Suh, as he's been very good at that golf course. I've followed him quite a bit out there over the last few years. So yeah, I like him more there, but he's a decent flyer, right? If you're using him as a flyer, I get it. Lived near the course in Vegas. It's not really a desert course. Yeah, that's what I was saying, right? It's been around since the 60s and more mature than some of the newer places. Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain, right? Like it's just a piece of property that has a bunch of grass and trees on it. There's no sand in between holes like you're going to see this week. So yeah, I think a desert course is like not the best way to explain it. It's a parkland style golf course that's in the desert. Kind of like what you have. What's the name of it? Shadow Creek, right? Same thing. List Rye EVR or Michael Kim as a last man in. I like all of them. I like the first two the most out of that bunch. I would probably go Luke List. Luke List, one of my top plays of the week. All right, let's go through the last little bit of strategy here. In terms of building lineups, right? If you're going to take some chalk up top, just make sure that you're being intentional with 1-2 slots in your lineup. So even if you're taking some like medium owned plays down here in the 8K range, down here in the 7s, make sure that at least 2 of your plays, right? Probably 2 of the 3 that you're taking. Maybe you're only taking 2 7K players, right? Make sure that at least one of them is sub 2% owned, right? So take a shot on a player down here. Maybe make that sub 4% owned, right? We'll give you a little bit more leeway with that little bit of leverage that you're looking for. And then at most, right, one of these chalky options, right? So like if you're going to take a guy that's like 8, a 10% owned Kurt Kitayama, for example, down here in the 7K range, limit yourself to 1, right? Don't indulge with, a Kurt Kitayama down here, and then also go up here and take like a chalky Akshay Bhatia, right? Because if you take those 2 in the 7K range, let's say you're taking like Hideki, right, at 14% here in the 8K, some sort of chalky play up here towards the top, maybe even 2 of them up here in the 9 and 10K range. That means your last 2 spots are going to have to be where all your leverage is, right? You're going to have to go out there and get real different, real funky, whether it's a 6 or 7K player that you're mixing in. And you're not going to feel very comfortable about that kind of lineup. So it's just, I would be careful with some of the 7K chalk. Let's say that much. It's a range, I think, to differentiate and try to win the GBP this week. I think up top is not the spot to do it. You can try and do it up top. You can pull it off, obviously, right? There are going to be guys that do, better than the others. I just think it's easier to do it in the 7K range where guys are overrated on a lot of times on a week like this. Let's look at the prop side of things now. So I'm going to give it 1 more minute of questions before we hop into props. So if you have any last second questions on players or on DFS, go ahead and let me know. But if not, we're going to hop right into the prop side of things. So while I'll blab here for a minute, while you put any of those questions in chat, lineup construction for me is going to be real simple, right? Up top, I'm going to take my guys. So let's say I'm starting a lineup with a couple of my guys, and let's say like a JT here. Let's throw Thigala into the lineup. Maybe we go down here and throw in Hideki here in the 8K range. We've got some chalk here, right? We've got 3 guys that are certainly not pivots at the top of the board. So we're going to have to think about ownership, right? So let's say I wanted to play Dietrich in this kind of lineup. Well, my other 7K player, right, as I was just mentioning, should not be like an 8% owned or 10% owned player, right? So we should not be using Kitayama in this kind of lineup. This is where you're going to have to force in a pivot. This is where you're going to have to be intentional, right, about getting different to the field. This is where an Adam Schenk comes in handy, right, who I've got at sub 5% ownership right now. For your last spot, right, you should probably also be intentional about making a pivot. So rather than taking who's going to be, somebody chalky, and let's say a Keith Mitchell, or maybe even a little bit chalky out there with a Denny McCarthy, maybe you throw in a Shane Lowry, right, who's a little bit lower owned, try and get a little bit different with your last man in. And this type of lineup you could probably get away with. Let's say you finish it off with Lowry, right, throw him in there. You could probably get away with that in a large field GPP. Single entries, you'd be totally fine. In fact, if you wanted to take maybe, let's say, Scotty Scheffler instead of JT, while in a large field GPP, I might not like that lineup nearly as much. If I was using Scotty in this lineup, I might want to be, a little bit more different, right, with my last man in. Obviously, that's going to change our salary situation. It's going to change our lineup construction here. So where we can get different, right, is by going down here and throwing in a pivot in the 7K range, right? So now rather than taking a piece of chalk with Hideki Matsuyama, because we're taking the super expensive Scotty, now we're forced to go down here to the 7K range. And instead of going like, oh, okay, well, I'll play, Kurt Kitayama, right? Kurt Kitayama, great play this week, right? You're not going to get different there, right? Now you can try and use this as a spot of leverage, right? So rather than going out there and taking somebody that's going to be popular, right? Like Mark Hubbard, right? Would also be a popular play. Like this isn't going to give us the leverage we're looking for. Go out there and throw in, let's see, a lower owned Emiliano Grillo, right? Like I agree with him there at $7,500. That's the kind of lineup I would prefer if you're taking a super chalky Scotty shuffler. So my lineups with Scotty going to be a little bit more different than the lineups that I'm starting with even like a Justin Thomas. But if I'm starting down here in the 9K range, I'm going to be a little bit more liberal with the way that I'm doing my leverage, right? I'm not going to be as stringent about going out there and throwing in pivots. Let's see. Any questions for DFS? If not, we're talking props. A few questions. Which of the Kims do I like? Can I rank them? I don't love a lot of them this week. I'm playing a little bit of Siwoo, not a lot of SH, and what we got Tom Kim too. Yeah, I'm playing Tom Kim. Tom Kim, Siwoo, then SH, and I think that's it, right? Might be another Kim in the field, but Michael Kim too. He's probably number 4. Thoughts on $6,700 JJ Spawn with the T5 finish in rainy conditions? So back there in 2017, right? Had that T5 finish. I think it's a decent flyer, right? So if you're going to try and find a narrative, right, that's the perfect type of thing to narrow in on. I think I had JG Spawn at like 2% ownership. So let me double check that on the other tab. Yeah, I've got him at 2% ownership. I like it. I think that if you're going to find a narrative, you run with it. And if it's a 2% owned player that has popped in the past, by all means, run with it. If you're just joining us or you're just heading out now that you're a DFS only player, still appreciate you guys. Best of luck out there with all your exposure. Go ahead, smash the like button on the way out of here. But now we're going to talk some props. So we're going to go through what to expect for PGA real quick, the ways that I'm attacking the underdog and prize picks boards. We're actually going to put in a brand new slip over here on prize picks as they took down the first set of exposure that we went with. And then I'll talk some LIV Golf too. So for LIV Golf, we're going to go through some props, some outrights and whatnot. But if you're a DFS only type of person, totally understand it. Best of luck out there with your exposure and show some love to the live stream on the way out of here. But in terms of our prop exposure, I think that round 1, you had some real bad lines to start the week in underdog. They posted guys at like 3.5 birdies, like Sahith Theegala early in the week. Even guys like Wyndham were at 3.5 birdies. There were just a lot of opportunities to be had. So if you were early to the board on underdog, you probably saw a lot of those bumps. And they were mostly caused by me because I entered $1,200 worth of slips. So my Patreon members obviously put in a lot of action out there on the board. There were other cappers, I'm sure, that were posting a lot of their own stuff out there for Thursday. And you saw the board switch quite a bit. So I think that the underdog board has adjusted quite a bit. It's pretty accurate at this stage, but a few hanging pieces of value, at least as of the last time I checked this, there are a few props that hadn't bumped already. And the ones that haven't bumped, we'll just go ahead and throw into a cart here. So let's go ahead and find our top 3, we'll say, out here for this. So all the Tom Kim ones bumped, Minwoo bumped. That's understandable. I didn't play something for Sam Burns. He was actually the only player I didn't max out for my round 1 exposure. The JT prop bumped. The Benny Ann one didn't, but we'll think about whether to enter that. I want to look at the Denny McCarthy. Actually, we're going to enter this. This is for sure going to be one of the props we're entering. It's an under on Denny McCarthy bogeys. He's at 3 bogeys. I'll explain why later. It's one of my favorites, so just want to have it in the cart. Let's find a few others. Max Homa strokes did not move, so we could take that. And when I find a birdie prop over, or they may have all moved, the ones that I took. So let's see. Let me get some water and let's find one. If they all moved, that sucks, but we have other stuff we can take if that's the case. And then where's Adam Hadwin? There's our prop I really like for Adam Hadwin. All right, let's do that. So what we're going to do here for the stream slip is this little 3-man. So the payout's not great. If you want to break this up into a 2-man and then try and find a pairing out there for Adam Hadwin, that's probably a better way to do it. So if you want to enter these two, or just if you had to pick like your top two, I think it would be these two. If you're just trying to find one little 2-man to run, the 2.79x payout is better compared to that 4.7x payout they're getting for the 3-man. Just comparatively, right, EV wise is a little bit better to these 2-mans. You get dinged quite a bit, right, for doing 3 props with correlation. With 2, there is a little bit of a, I was going to say bonus, right, but it's the opposite of a bonus, right? A little bit of a deduction when it comes to the payout, but it's worth it when you can go out there and take advantage of course conditions. And what we have here are 2 props that I think are in like the 80% plus in terms of hit rate. You've got Denny McCarthy, who's projected over the field bogey average for the last like 5 seasons. So like the last 5 times they played the Waste Management, you've never had more than a 3 per round bogey average. Denny McCarthy was number 19 on tour last year in bogey avoidance. So if you look at this field, right, he's clearly top 10 in that category in terms of avoiding bogeys. And then you're telling me he's projected over the field average, and what I think might be at least 0.25 over the field average, maybe even a whole half a bogey higher than what you should see him at. I mean, the guy projects for 2 or less bogeys per round, right, at this sort of golf course. If they have ball in hand, right, that's going to make it even easier to get up and down when you miss. Just makes me absolutely love him at this kind of golf course. So I took his under on bogeys, and then this over on Adam Hadwin. He's played here the last 3 years. He's made the cut every time, and he's 10 for 12 on covering this. What makes me like it even more this time around is the fact that it's so soft, right? So we talked about the weather before. It looks a little bit windy tomorrow, which isn't great, right? Like in an ideal world, right? We want it to be real calm out there for our players. It's going to be windy as hell, though. The thing kind of offsetting that is the fact that it's going to be rainy, right? It's rained yesterday and it rained today, right? It rained about half an inch out there in Scottsdale today. Out there on a Tuesday, it rained about a half an inch. Day before that, an entire inch out there in Scottsdale. They're going to have absolute dartboards for greens. And if they're going to have dartboards for greens, that means we're going to see a slightly higher green and regulation average. And he's already been smashing this line. You're talking about a guy who's a top 70 player on tour when it comes to green and regulation percentage, a top 50 player in this field when it comes to green and regulation percentage, which again would have him over that field average. And I think we might see about a 12.5 green and regulation average out there for the first round, right? So kind of like Denny McCarthy, you're talking about a player that is projecting better than the average, but is projected at worse than what we're projecting it for, right? So like an elite tier player, Denny McCarthy, right? Number 19 on tour is elite in that category. Maybe not as elite for an Adam Hadwin, but he has an incredible track record at this course. He's 5 for 5 on made cuts on his last 5 seasons at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. And on top of that, does really well at the Amex, right? Another golf course that's a desert golf course. For whatever reason, out here in the southwest of the United States, the guy makes like every cut. I mean, it's uncanny how well he plays on these courses. Into the track record with the greens backs that up, right? He hits at least like 13 greens in regulation in almost every round that he plays here. And the last reason that maybe like these two the most is that the fact that they're AMT times, right? So Max Homa, I think, was also an AMT time, right? You can see there with the 9:53 AM start time there. That's of course 2 hours ahead of where they are out west, right? They're so they'll be starting at like 8:59 AM tee times in terms of local time. Still there in the morning, right? And if we look at the conditions, they're going to avoid a lot of the rain, right? The wind conditions aren't horrible out there in the morning. It's more so that midday period for that 2-3 hour period where they're going to be dealing with most of the windy conditions. So they're the types of plays I like. A little 2-man over there and a prop over here on Prize Picks. I had this over on Adam Hadwin that they completely ripped off the board. I had him over, and it was a Ricky Fowler over 12.5 greens. And instead of bumping them, they just ripped them off the board. So that was disappointing to say the least, and a reason why we're going to have to find another slip to enter over here on Prize Picks. One play you really like is Kim over 8 fairways. What do I think about that piece? I like it. He's at 8 over here in Prize Picks, I'm guessing, or was that on Underdog, right? So yeah, over there on the Underdog side, yeah, he's an elite level driver, right? And I think the average is pretty close to like 8 fairways per round historically at this event. Let's see, was it Siwoo or is it Tom Kim? Is it Siwoo or Tom Kim? Probably Tom Kim, right? I don't even know if they have Siwoo up. Let's see. Yeah, so yeah, it's Tom Kim. They're both elite level drivers. Actually, Tom Kim is an even better driver of the golf ball than what you have with Siwoo Kim. So even better spot, I would say. So yeah, so if you wanted to get, exposure to all four of those props, you could take this Tom Kim over, and you can go over here and find, what was that, Max Homa, right, under strokes, added another little two-man for 2.84x. So the reason why I completely agree with this with Tom Kim is the field average for fairways is right around 8 over the last 5 seasons. Tom Kim, an extremely accurate player, right? Somebody that hits a lot of fairways, was top 25 on tour last year in that category, projected at the field average. So completely agree with you. Yeah, I'm just seeing your comments down there about it being Tom Kim. Yeah, I think that's a really sharp play. Good call. And gives people on the stream here a pairing for Max Homa. And I guess I'll explain the Max Homa play, right? Not just throw him out there and not give you guys the info. He's much lower on the sports books, right? So if we go over here and look at his odds, right, he's at 68.5 strokes. He's at 68.5 strokes over here on Prize Picks, which I think is the more efficient projection. So why not take him with that push equity there at 69? So that's the thought process. Obviously, a little bit of a discrepancy compared to some of the other sports books out there. And something I took out there on Monday before we even got the odds, right? I was already thinking about taking that under on Max Homa. What we'll do next over here is look at Prize Picks, where they have been unbelievably quick to move stuff. A prop I know 100% I want to take is this Hideki Matsuyama over. He's at 3.5 birdies. In fact, might be at that same number on Underdog now that I think about it. Yeah, is also there. So you could take that too, right? If you were looking for a pairing. But we'll take it over here on the Prize Pick side, right? Just for the sake of not getting too much exposure to any one prop. So Hideki Matsuyama at 3.5 birdies. He's covered this in, I believe it was 10 of his last 12 rounds. That includes 1 year at the Waste Management that played significantly harder than the others. So he had the 1 year, and I think he went like 2 for 4 that year. The other 2 years, he was 8 for 8 on covering this 3.5 line. So as elite level course history, I think last year was 3 for 4 or something like that, going out there and covering 3.5 birdies. And that was without his best stuff, was not playing the best golf, went out there, still was able to put up that birdie production. And for whatever reason, when we've gotten him on these POA overseeded greens, he's made quite a few 15, 20 footers out there, right? Putts that you normally don't see him making all that often. Go in the hole out there at the Waste Management, TPC Scottsdale. So we'll take Hideki. He's probably should be at like 4 birdies at the very least, I would say. It's fine to pairing though. So in terms of a pairing, they have bumped down a whole lot of this board when it came to strokes. They had guys like Tom Kim and Minwoo at 69.5 strokes. They had guys like Jordan at 69.5, who was a pretty good play at that price tag. So I kind of wish I got there. Scotty, right, was at 68.5. They had Justin Thomas at 69 strokes. So I'm trying to find something that hasn't bumped, because just for my conscience, I hate bumping, betting stuff that has bumped. So let's see if I can find something that hasn't moved. I feel like this Gary Woodland prop hasn't. But it's also a very rusty Gary Woodland. So I kind of understand why it hasn't moved. If anyone has any Prize Picks exposure that they really like, I guess, let me know in chat. But if we're going to lean on anything here, I kind of like some of these PM birdies, right? So I know we were talking about the winds dying down. If we get that, right, Hideki can take advantage, and potentially like an Adam Scott, right? So let's line shop here. I mean, he's probably the best birdie maker left on this board, and we don't even have to guess. Let me just bring up the PGA site. Let's see if he is, in fact, the highest birdie percentage player left. So, all right, we can share our screen here. And yeah, any thoughts on the Prize Picks board? Let me know down in chat, guys. I am open to suggestions for a pairing here with Hideki. I'm leaning right now, right, towards this birdie or better prop on what is it, Adam Scott that we're taking. But let's double check this. So one I'm going to look for here is where Adam Scott ranks. I know Hideki doesn't rank well on birdie or better percentage. Did not play well last year, right? And birdie or better percentage last year. In fact, let's just go to the full list. He was number 10 on tour. That's outrageous. Now, he hasn't played much golf, right? At least he played last week at Pebble Beach, right? He's able to knock off some of the rust. I don't love him in DFS, but this feels like a smash spot, right? If it looks like the winds are going to get easier, right? I mean, it's still going to be soft, right? It's supposed to rain during the day. These PM guys are going to have arguably just as soft a golf course, just as easy a golf course to attack is what you have with some of the AM wave guys. So that's what we're going to do here. I've got a whole max of $15 over here on Prize Picks for every entry, every entry that I'm going with. That'll be the 2-man that we enter for a whole like $41 that I can win on this slip. So we'll get our extra exposure here in a few minutes when I can log into my other account. But that's what we'll go with for right now. Let's talk about some LIV now. So if you have any questions about this Prize Picks board, we'll go through it. Let me see if we had any suggestions down in chat. And then we'll talk some LIV Golf and maybe some Hard Rock Bet stuff, right? Let's see. What do I think about Eckroat? Sneaky, low-owned value guy or trash? I wouldn't call him trash. Wouldn't go that far. But yeah, sneaky, low-owned value sounds about right? He's popped before. He's shown us that ceiling potential in the past. I think he's a sneaky play. I think that's a good way to put it. For Sungjae Im, yeah, weather kind of hurt him. I agree with that. Sungjae Im, though, very well-rounded player, really good course history. The ownership I thought was going to be higher than it actually is. As of right now, I've got Sungjae at 16.2%. I could get behind that, right? Because he's not as mega chalky as he probably should be. And in fact, 99% sure I'm playing him, but I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. Yeah, I'm playing him this week. Yeah, I like him. Let's see, any Euro golf bets? Probably not. I haven't done any research there. It's a big week for the PGA. Also got LIV Golf going. So yeah, probably not. Connors with the afternoon tee time and an accurate driver of the ball at 3.5. I could totally get behind that. I like the accurate driver of the ball, right? So you're going to be able to take advantage of potential lift clean in place. Yeah, I think you can throw him in there too. You got the course history guy in Hideki, right? You got Adam Scott, number 10 on tour last year and making birdies. I mean, that's crazy. I didn't know that. I thought he was going to be like 50, and I thought that was going to be decent, right? Out there for our play. He's freaking number 10 on tour. Just for the sake of looking at this, what was Corey Connors? I know he wasn't as good, but he was probably like 50, right? 62 on tour and birdie or better percentage. Totally fine with that. Yeah. Could get behind him as a potential play too. Let's see, anything else? Okay, looks like we're good. Let's talk some LIV Golf. So the LIV Golf event this week, let me actually go to the LIV Golf website because we'll look at this golf course, right? It's one that we haven't seen for tournament play since I think it was like the early 2000s on the PGA Tour. They played it. Guys like Phil Mickelson were playing this golf tournament back in the day, and it hasn't seen anything since. I think it's been a few like LPGA events that they've played there, but nothing where we have shots gained or any real leaderboards to look at, right? Because there's a few things to consider, right? If we're looking at the early 2000s, right, for golf data, the equipment is so much different now than what they had in the early 2000s that it's not really comparable. So the one thing I did notice is some of the past champions at this golf course were all major champions. It was a laundry list of guys that are Hall of Fame golfers. It was like Greg Norman, who obviously LIV Golf CEO. I don't think a surprise that they showed up to this golf course, but it looks like a ball striking test. Like we're not going to get that much of length here, right? It's only 7,000 yards. So I think with the added equipment changes, they're probably going to go a lot lower now than what they did in the past. But in the past, this was a test, right? It was not a golf course that these guys were absolutely bullying. One thing I will say is right now, I do think it might get bullied a little bit because of the changes, but they're definitely trying to combat that. I've heard from people that are from Vegas that have played this golf course over the last few months say that the rough there has been already growing, right, in anticipation of this event. And from the person that played it in the last month that I got some info from, some boots on the ground info, said that it was at least 3 inches out there a month ago, and that the superintendent literally told him, you had a conversation with him at the starter booth, said that they were quote unquote growing it out this year for the LIV Golf event. So you have a golf course that has a bunch of trees on it. You would not expect that for a Las Vegas golf course. And on top of that, one that's going to have some rough. So there's no props up in terms of like scores over here on like Prize Picks. As we go to LIV Golf, right, it's only birdie or better matchups. Let me refresh Underdog. I don't believe they have anything up in terms of their LIV Golf board because we don't really know what to expect, right? So I was kind of hoping they'd post props and that they would post them at like really hard scores. because then I would go out there and fade them, right? Just hoping that the reports about the rough are true, and hope that the golf course has a little bit of teeth. But it looks like they're taking that wait and see approach. You can't really blame them considering the unknowns at hand. But in terms of betting, like there are a few matchups that you could look at over here in Prize Picks. I don't bet birdie or better matchups, so I'm not going to indulge in that myself. But it does help us from the outright perspective, which if you didn't catch my video this week, my outrights this week are Justin Thomas. I bet Jordan Spieth because I always bet him. So he's technically on the card, but not an official pick. So it's JT as an official pick. It's Sahith Theegala that I also took outright, and that's it. It's just those three players. I'm not going crazy on the golf outrights, but I did bet Minwoo for a top, I think it was top 20 or top 10 bet with Minwoo. Also a top 10 bet on Thomas Dietrich, a top 20 on Luke List, and then also a top 20 on Grayson Murray, who I got at like crazy odds, like a plus 650 or something like that for a plus for a top 20. For the LIV Golf side, I've bet DJ and I bet Brooks Koepka this week. So if the reports are true about the rough being extremely long, that's going to favor your higher ball speed players. And again, this isn't a long golf course, so I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that narrative. The odds on Hard Rock Bet would certainly back that up, right? If we look at them over here, right, a lot of like your shorter hitters are in the equation. Right? So like Terrell Hatton's right 12-1. I mean, somebody like Cam Smith is right 15-1. You got guys like DJ down here at 16-1. You got Brooks here, right, like 14-1. It kind of feels like they're being disrespected, and they're especially being disrespected if the golf course is harder off the tee than what people realize, right? Like they look at a 7,000-yard golf course and go, oh yeah, anyone can play there, right? Not if you have 3-4 inch rough, right? In that case, it's bombers and then hyper accurate players, right? You either got to be able to hit out of that rough and get away with it, kind of like Bryson at the US Open, or you have to be a Brian Harmon and completely avoid it, right? And try and win your major championship that way. So I think it's an interesting event to kind of, go against the grain for some of your outright plays, just because we don't know what the hell to expect. I mean, hell, the best example of that is these guys not even posting boards, right, on Prize Picks and Underdog. So I think if you're going to do anything, try and take a narrative or maybe bet, somebody you wouldn't normally bet out there for LIV Golf, because it might be a little bit of a crazy week on that side. In terms of first round leaders, I'm only going to give one pick for first round leaders on LIV. But if I was going to take a random shot, it'd be like a Chikara. It'd be just some like young kid who hits the ball a country mile, who you've seen get hot and be a first round leader before out there on the LIV Golf circuit. It'd be that kind of guy I'd take for a first round leader. It's we just don't know what to expect, right? So if I'm going to play a first round leader at that kind of event, you take a shot on somebody that just has upside and nothing else. Over here for the WM, our outrights have moved quite a bit. So I had 11-1 on JT. I had 20-1 on Spieth. A lot of these numbers aren't really bettable anymore. The numbers for top 10s and top 20s are a little bit more consistent. So you can check those out. But I know we mentioned potentially looking at some first round leader action. If I'm going to go first round leader for this event, especially with the fact that it's going to be a little bit windy, a little bit rainy out there, I really want to take a shot on somebody, right? Because every once in a while in windy conditions, you just see somebody go absolutely nuclear. And I don't know, like it would just make too much sense, right? For like an Aaron Rai to be your first round leader. I think a PM wave guy would probably be preferred. So let me check his tee time. I think he's PM wave, but let me confirm that. He's AM wave. So maybe not the best pick for a first round leader. Unlike most slates where we want guys going off early for our first round leader, it might be a slate that take the PM guy, right? You take a real late tee time. It just kind of hope that the conditions die down and that they have perfect scoring conditions for the last 3 hours. So if we're looking at tee times here, the reason why I went over here to the PGA site, as you're probably wondering, right, is who are some of the last tee times that we could take for a first round leader? Just like really try and like emphasize that. So like Ryan Fox kind of stands out, real aggressive player. Bazane Hood even, Jake Knapp, right, an option. You've got Sugg going off super late. Johnny Vegas really sticks out. In fact, we're only going to do one for each site. Again, I don't bet these. I'm only mentioning them because somebody wanted me to give my thoughts on them. If I was going to bet one for the PGA Tour, it would be Johnny Vegas because he's going off super late. He's a super streaky player. I mean, he had a round of like 8 under, maybe even 9 under par to try and make the cut a few weeks ago. Round 1, he shot +7. Round 2, he shot like -9 and missed the cut by 1 shot. So he's that type of player to begin with, and he's at 150 to 1. So if Johnny Vegas is your first round leader tomorrow, that would be pretty sweet. In fact, I'm going to place this bet as soon as we get off stream and I can log into my account. So we'll see about that. And any questions in chat? Let's see. You thought this was a horse racing video? What the hell? You've played that course several times and it's not too tough. But like you said, if they have the rough grown out, then it could play harder. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking if I'm going to take any narrative, right? And what I did for my outright bets is that off the tee, it might be a little bit harder than what people think, right? And if it's off the tee going to play harder than what people think, DJ and Brooks see a huge advantage, right? Because they're world-class drivers. That's the only thing I can think of because, I mean, again, early 2000s, this course is probably so much different from the last time we saw it. And the only guy in the field that's going to have any course history from them is freaking old Phil Mickelson, right? So it's like, what can we even really look into? So it should be a fun one. Have fun out there if you're going to go to the LIV Golf this week. Have fun out there on the golf course. And I have so many buddies that are going to be out there in Scottsdale this week. Some friends that are from Vegas that are going to be going to the LIV Golf event. I'm officially jealous whether you're going to Super Bowl or not. That's sounds like a fun weekend. But best of luck out there to everyone this week. That is all I've got for this live stream. Already went a little bit over time. Appreciate all the support here as per usual, though. Go ahead, smash that like button on the way out of here. And also subscribe because we'll be doing live streams from rounds 2 through 4. I'm going to be out of town for rounds 3 and 4, but still going to find some time to go live for you guys to give you guys all the action for Showdown and, of course, for props for rounds 2 through 4. So best of luck out there with your exposure, whether it's for DFS or out there on the betting side of things. And let's have ourselves a week, fellas.